What is up, everyone? We are here for TCR Live, and I've got the everything all mixed up. Here we go. Hello, we're here for Mock Draft Monday, and I'm messing with everything behind the scenes, and I can't think. I am TCR, you know me, Joe. I'm joined by Kyler Bird, Blake Murphy, two of my favorite Cardinals folks. Kyler, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing great, man. I'm glad to be back on I think our first shared stream of this season. So happy to be back with you, my friend.
Blake, how are you, dude?
Doing good, guys. Hey, it's a nice day under 100 degrees now in March, and we're not going to get many more days like this for the rest of the year up until we finally get into probably October, November, even, I'd say, in Arizona. So just enjoying the little bits of time and the little walks you can take, at least, with the weather being as nice and cold. And it is also mock draft season, which is getting into full swing. So that's the other thing that you can see is there's always a change in the winds this time of year that seems to come up with people just having nothing to do but wait for the draft and do mocks.
And I'll tell you, this year feels like one of the more uncertain years. I mean, there have been other years where we didn't know what they were going to do at 3. There were some years where you had a pretty clear idea, Marvin Harrison Jr., right? Whatever you might think of that pick. But there is a lot of debate, a lot of uncertainty, and has to do with, as we talked about, the draft class is kind of weird at the top in particular. Non-premium positions being some of the best players. The premium position players have some question marks. And we're actually going to get into some of those question marks because I wanted to talk about Francis Mauigoa. I wanted to kind of, have a conversation where we look at him as a potential pick number 3 because he's probably at this point the player who is most often mocked to the Cardinals by people outside of the Phoenix market, experts, so to speak. And he is, as we were talking about before, there's some people thinking that maybe in another class he would be a reach. In terms of the skill level, good player, but maybe someone you'd expect more to be taken at pick 10 in a normal draft instead of 3. And I've wrestled with that, and I wanted to have a conversation about that and go over why some of there's the questions and some of the things that I've wrestled with. I've gone back and forth. A week ago, I thought, I thought they're not going to take him. I think they're going to take a defensive player and go tackle on day 2. And now I'm coming back around where I think maybe they are going to take him. So I'm going to walk through some of the arguments and the pros and cons, and then I'm going to kind of get you both in the conversation as far as your thoughts. So when you look at Francis Mauigoa, right, he's meets a need, right? We need a right tackle. Everyone knows this. It's our most pressing need outside of quarterback, in my opinion, is this starting right tackle. And he, looks like the guy who can fit the bill, right? He was outstanding in college. Most people believe he's the best tackle in this draft, but problem is some people believe he's the best guard in this draft. And if is a guard, and we'll talk about why that argument is, then it doesn't really fit the kind of the Monty motif. I've got this almighty chart. Folks that are follow the channel understand kind of what this is about. I look at the draft picks that Monty has made, plus the front offices where he worked prior to coming here, just to get sort of an idea of their philosophy. And some of it there's a little more loosey-goosey, a little gray. The receivers, they take a couple different spots, but one of these patterns that is very firm is they don't take interior offensive linemen before round 3, and they really like to take them in round 4, and that has been the pattern since he's been here, right? He's taken Isaiah Adams in the 3rd round and a couple guys in the 4th round, and that's one of those things where it's like, okay, if anyone is saying that Mauigoa is going to be a guard at the NFL level, then that doesn't seem like a pick that Monty Austin Fort wants to make. And I dug a little deeper in this because we're like, okay, well, some people say he can stick at tackle. Well, I with a little bit of help from our good friend Gemini, a little AI assist, I went and brought up information about all the offensive linemen that were actually included in that analysis. Now, I'll zoom into a bigger picture here, but this is them by round. I included who they were, which team drafted them, what their college position was, and their NFL position, because some guys are drafted, they were tackles in college, but they move inside. But what I want to hone in on is this first round. And listen, there's some misses there. Isaiah Wilson, Isaiah Wynn was okay. Nate Solder Great Paris Johnson Jr. Yep, I think he's been very good, but people have mixed opinions. But the thing I really want to hone in on is first round offensive linemen that Monty has taken or the front offices he's been a part of have taken have always been tackles who stayed tackles at the NFL level. They did not take tackles that moved into guard. And they had long arms. 34 inches was the shortest. And that was, Isaiah Wynn was a late first rounder who played right tackle a lot, right? But most of them were good, 35 plus, 35 and a half plus. So this brings us to Mauigoa, right? Whose arms are 33 and a quarter, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Well below this threshold. And again, if you look back, like the players that they took, and it's a little hard to see, but they did take some guys that were tackles in college who moved inside with shorter arms, but they were all later rounds. So what do we do with this, right? Because when I looked at this, that's when I was like, you know what? Monty wants to take tackles with long arms in the first round. If he's going to take a chance on someone with shorter arms, he's going to do it later. Mauigoa's not going later. That's where I started to move in the direction of I thought, you know what, they're going to maybe take an offensive line. They're going to take a tackle in round 3. But then I come back to this, and one of the comps, and hat tip to Drew, who kind of shared this in response to some tweets I posted. This is a screenshot from, Combine, and physical comps, right? Was Penei Sewell, who was drafted by the Lions, and they had a certain person in their front office named Dave Sears, who's here. And the Cardinals have met with Mauigoa twice. Like, they know he's going early, and they met with him twice. You don't meet with someone twice if you're not willing to consider drafting. Now, maybe they're checking out other ways of measuring. I saw a video clip from Joe Thomas talking about how the way they measure is from like your middle fingertip to your shoulder, and that's not where your reach is. It's where your palms are, and he thought it was overrated, so I'm going back on this because Penei Sewell has been one of the best, if not the best, right tackle in the NFL, and he has the arms that are similar to Mauigoa, but his technique is good, which is what you need. So I go back and forth on this, and today I feel like Mauigoa is going to be the pick. Tomorrow I might go back to thinking he isn't. So Blake, let's start with you. Now that I've kind of laid that all out, what are your thoughts on the whole Francis Mauigoa situation?
Well, I think a lot of what really it boils down to is how important is it for Monty to be able to at least look at measurables as being a factor? Because we've seen a lot of times he does guys who are going to be fitting a lot of measurables, but maybe are not the most athletic as far as their profiles. Whereas with Mauigoa, you've got a guy at least who hasn't gone through the rest of the combine, the testing process, but you can see on the tape, powerful run blocker. You can have a lot of people questioning about the arm length, about moving to guard. For me, he reminds me a little bit of someone, and this is a comp that was run by Lance Zierlein, Talise Fuaga, who is the right tackle for the Saints. He had the 33 and 1/8, so shorter arms than what you're talking about here. What we've seen with Mauigoa and Penei Sewell, I think, is that Sewell is a little bit more athletic. I think that Mauigoa is a little bit better as far as a run blocker, which is actually really complimentary if you watch Penei Sewell in college as a run blocker. It was just that Penei was a little bit better in the pass game. So when you put all of those pieces together, you get a guy who's probably going to be an offensive tackle that's taken in the top 10, but he's not quite in the Joe Alt sort of class, where you're talking about like instant upgrade. He's going to be an alpha on your line for, Pro Bowl caliber player for the next decade. That was something where Joe Alt just kind of checked every single box along the way. So while you're going to be checking probably all of the boxes that are needed for a quality right tackle, one of the other things I think that's hilarious about the NFL is that there's all sorts of people who will go, well, it could be a great tackle, and if he's not, we'll just push him inside the guard. One of the players that was given as a comp to was DJ Humphries. People were like, hey, DJ Humphries, he's all right as a tackle. He doesn't have the athleticism maybe to stick as an offensive tackle for a long time, but we can always shift him into guard if need be. And he played tackle in the league for over 10 years now. And so you're talking about a lot of times this idea, at least of arm length, or guys who are offensive tackles, you can always shift them into guard. It gets overblown. There's guys who can hold up on the edge, and there's guys who don't hold up on the edge. What we've seen with Mauigoa over the last 3 years is he's had a lot of durability. He does a lot of pancake blocks where he's just burying his guy on the ground. Super great contact. And then when it comes to footwork, he's probably got the best footwork of any offensive tackle in this class. So what I think at least is there's going to be some flaws that pop up because every prospect has flaws. I think Paris Johnson Jr. was a better prospect, especially on the athletic side when you're looking at the tape of being able to deal with kind of the speed pass rushers. But Mauigoa, at least as far as the road grader right tackle, fits that to a T. And so for me, the question then comes down to not is he worth the overall pick at 3, but do you take him at 3 compared to who the other players are with the best player in the draft? And I think what we also have talked about, compared to other players in the draft, because this is a draft where there is a pretty significant drop-off for offensive tackle depth after the first 40 picks or so. And that's where a lot of people have looked at the Cardinals and said, if you've got a need and you may not get that chance to get that guy in round 2, or if you do, you're going to be forcing that pick into round 2, maybe you just go out, draft a guy as best as you can to fix that need right away from the start. And that's part of why a lot of people are just looking at the Cardinals right tackle situation. They look at CC, as he's called, which is funny because I think of St. Francis of Assisi when you say CC and Francis together. You look at CC Mauigoa, and then you just plug and play, and it's kind of like people who, in some cases, are like, all right, the Cardinals need a quarterback right now. Let's just plug a quarterback in as soon as we can, at least in that pick, because there's an obvious need. That's not how every general manager works, but it is a lot of times at the top of the draft we've seen, if there is a team with a need, a lot of times those plug and play guys do actually make sense, and that's part of why I think there is a legitimate chance the Cardinals could take Mauigoa.
Kyler, what do you think?
I have been a Mauigoa guy pretty much this entire draft season, and I haven't really hidden that, and I'm not going to change from that now. I stick by this. Every draft is a completely different situation in a completely different class with every team having completely different needs. And I'm not a huge believer, really, in best player available. Like, I get it as a concept, but also in the real world, you're taking the best player available for your needs. That's just how this thing works. If you don't need a certain position, you're not going to spend the number 3 pick on it, especially these premium picks. And if you can only pick 2 positions that the Cardinals absolutely need to get in the first round, it is probably edge rusher or a right tackle. And there are edge rushers that are possible at this spot, which is, to me, the big question at 3. There are legitimate pass rushers that are going to be available there. And there's David Bailey. There's, dependent on how you feel about Arvell Reese and what you want him to do, like, there are options there if you want to do that. So that would make a second-round tackle very possible. But to me, all of the potential edge rushers there do have their own questions as well. I don't think any of them are just like, all right, this guy's next Myles Garrett, can't miss. So in that situation, I think addressing offensive line is more important. And when I think of Mauigoa, and I think that this big question and this heartburn that we go through is through this, like, not infallible measurement system, and we're talking about an inch here, like an inch and a half, and everyone's fears would be mostly allayed. I have watched a lot of Miami football for some reason this year, and Mauigoa is a guy. Like, in a different class, in a different year, would he be the number 3 overall pick? Probably not, but he is a first-round tackle in any year. And this year, we have the number 3 pick. We need a right tackle desperately. And if we want to follow what I think is this year's blueprint of, let's fix the offensive line as much as we possibly can to prep ourselves for quarterback in 2027. Let's get the most complete package of a team we can to throw a young quarterback into next year, so hopefully they can have success right away, and let's not do what we did to Kyler Murray to our next quarterback. Francis Mauigoa strikes me as the perfect player for something like that, the perfect personality for it. That comp with Penei Sewell is excellent, because that is pretty much exactly what the Detroit Lions did with Penei Sewell is drafting him in their little rebuild process before they get a quarterback and like actually make a run for things and start being aggressive. So I have never had a problem with Mauigoa, and I am still pretty confident he's going to be the pick.
Yeah, and I think I still Bane is the guy I like, and I know he's got arm length questions. I
Yeah.
think Bane is going to be really good against the run and a solid pass rusher and a high effort guy. So I really love Bane, but objectively speaking, I get the pass rushing class is deeper. There will be guys in the second round who will be good pass rushers if we want to wait there. There's a lot of talk of there being a run on tackles in the first round, that the guys like Max Ahiakanor and other guys that we hope would be there may not be there. But that cuts two ways, because if we go edge early and we miss out on a tackle at 34, and then we have to wait to the third round. What also comes with that, though, is there could be some really good edge rushers that slide to pick 34 that we're like, well, we took one at 3. Are we going to take another one now, right? So we're missing out on the value there. If those tackles do take a late first round run, like a lot of people say they are, there's going to be some defensive linemen and some edge rushers that you would think should go late in the first round that are there sitting there at pick 34, right? So there's some wisdom to that. Real quick, I want to say hey to some of the folks in the chat. We've got Robert Moore saying, good evening, gents. He's here hanging out with us. We've got our good friend Paul. Thank you for being here, Paul. Everyone's sending some thoughts out for Paul. Paul is dealing with, going through cancer treatment. Paul's been a Cardinals fan for longer than I've been alive. He's a true OG. We got Classy Nasty. Hola, amigos. Appreciate you being here hanging out with us. Chris is glad that I'm here 2 weeks in a row. So yes, I've been on the schedule. Robert makes a good point that, Mauigoa has been practicing against Bane, right? All season long and holding his own, right? So, there's some different thoughts on that. And then Robert saying, I think there'll be a run on tackles round 1, then edge round 2. So we're at the top of round 2. So maybe that makes sense, right? Maybe taking Mauigoa, yes, it feels like a little bit of a reach in another draft class. This draft class is weird. Boy, I tell you what, if we could trade back a few spots and still get Mauigoa, I am all for that. Like, someone come trade up to draft Love, right? Jeremiah Love, right? Let's get the Giants or someone who wants him and wants to jump ahead of Tennessee to trade with us. Let us move back and get Mauigoa. I'm super happy then, right? So we'll see, right? It's tough.
It's like, Kyler, you're talking about the best talent available. I like to use the term, if you're looking at BPA, best player available, versus most talented player, or like biggest need, I guess would be the other aspect. I like to look at best fit available, because a fit implies that there's a need, but also implies that there's a talent that's going to be there. So I like to try to say who is the best fit that's going to be available. And in some cases, I think that if this is a spot where the Cardinals were picking at maybe 5 or 6, would be pretty much like a hands-on. We would not even be having the conversation. There would just be a lot of people sliding him into the mock drafts. What I think comes down to it with some of these edge rushers is that the Cardinals, what we saw last year, got a good enough, at least from their edge rushing position. But on the other side, you got Zaven Collins. You don't have anything you've seen from B.J. Ojolari. You didn't see as much from Baron Browning. You're kind of in a place where you could argue that you've got your left pass rusher set. You might need your right pass rusher set just as much as you need your right tackle set. I think the biggest gap and difference is the Cardinals at least have bodies there at the edge rush on that spot because of Zaven, because of Barron. They really are down to figuring out if they're going to move like a guy who played guard the last time he was in Arizona out to tackle, putting a Josh Fryer out there. That's where it feels like there's a bigger gap as far as a need that they have. And that's part of why I think a lot of people are putting Mauigoa in at 3, and why I think there is a good chance that he could be the pick at 3.
Yeah, and I'm kind of with you. Like, straight up best player available. How do you define that? I mean, I'm such a believer in positional value, and that you take certain positions in certain ranges. So, and even like who's the best player? Like, most of the time, with rare exceptions, you're usually picking between 3 to 5 players that are comparable, right? They're kind of ties, like, and in terms of who's the best player. So from there, you do need a tiebreaker, and that tiebreaker ends up being some combination of positional value, scarcity, of that position in the draft class and your need, right? So, this idea. Now, if the player that you want to take for those reasons is a step below another player at a different position, then maybe you trade back, or something like that. So I think best player available, how does positional scarcity and positional value play into that, right? Because is Fernando Mendoza the best player in this draft? I don't think so. He's going number one because quarterback is the most important position, and he gets a bump for that. So it's complicated, right? Real quick, I want to say hey to Gavin Moore. Thanks for joining us. Good evening, gents, from Virginia, East Coast Cardinals fan. I'm in Georgia, so I'm with you there. Of course, we got Grandizer doing what Grandizer does best, being an encourager and helping us in the chat. So thank you all for being here with us. Yeah, I think it's an interesting conversation. We're going to see, obviously, next month where they go. But I've been so torn on this, and now I'm kind of back around where there are players I like better, but I'm at least back to where I think I can absolutely see them taking Mauigoa despite the arm length thing, right?
Agreed. And I think that's something where if they could trade back and be able to take someone like Mauigoa or even Fano, I could see that being their absolute preference of trying to load up on 2027 draft picks or getting another draft pick in this draft if they could. I just think it's going to be really hard to see a team want to move up into that number 3 spot.
Yeah, I agree. I think if they trade back, they're not getting a 2027 pick, and they're getting less trade value than they would normally get. But if you can add a third-round pick from this year to do that and move a couple spots, I would take that. It's me, right? But we'll see, right? But let's get into the mocks, and let's see what you guys would do, because we talked about Mauigoa, and we talked about tackles, and I've seen our mock drafts because I put this together, and we took some different approaches, which helps illustrate kind of the ambivalence here with them. And we're going to jump right in to our good buddy Blake of the Redbird Reboot podcast and let Blake talk about his mock draft, his thought process. What were you thinking, Blake?
So let's start just with the number 3 pick, because in these scenarios, there's 3 edge rushers that we all have that everyone knows about. There's Arvell Reese, who is an inside linebacker that a lot of people are projecting to the edge, similar to how Micah Parsons went because of the athleticism and because of the length. He's got some great length, a highly explosive player. There's going to be David Bailey, who's more of like your quick first get off, easily being able to kind of slash and play, being able to have a relatively great size and athleticism at 6'5", obviously ran the 4.5 40-yard dash. Explosive first step and get off is one of the things that you see with him. There's a lot that's there to like. And then there's Ruben Bain, who is kind of unique because he's someone who is much more of an ankle flexion type of player with insane amount of bend and flexibility. He's got shorter arms and is someone who at least is very violent as far as with his speed to power, in a way where Bailey's a little bit smoother, Bain's a little bit more violent, and Bain is someone that is probably one of my favorite players to watch in this draft because he does really show up with not just great ability as far as being able to get around the edge. He doesn't have the greatest as far as closing speed like Bailey, and then Reese especially is. There's a reason why I think Reese is being right now the betting favorite to go number 2 is because of that closing speed. But he is someone who is a stellar run defender because he just sheds blocks and is able to get past it. So it's a guy that you essentially can leave on the field for all 3 downs. When it came to it, I don't really feel like I have a preference between, because I think there's pros and cons to all 3 of them. The biggest thing was if Bain had, I would say, 2 to 3 inch longer arms with his wingspan, he probably is the unquestioned number 2 overall pick. It's the fact that his arms are a little bit shorter that people are looking at him and saying, maybe he ends up falling down to some of the teens. He also wasn't quite as productive. He didn't have 10 sacks in a season. He had 15 and a half tackles for loss, but it didn't come close to the 14 and a half sacks that David Bailey had at Texas Tech this past year. So it's a spot where between the 3 of them, I like to be able to try to say, if I'm going to put everything together, I try to put together What do we know about the player that we have that we can physically be able to see with all of the different reports? What do we know about what we see from the statistics? Because production is performance. That's one of the things that we know about in the NFL is if you're going to draft a guy who doesn't have a lot of production and you're betting on his production suddenly hitting in the NFL, things are only going to get harder. You're not going to get easier. A lot of times production actually will end up tailing off. Sometimes guys will go out and have a better pro career than a college career, but being able to bet on that is a risky gamble. And the last thing, of course, is you turn on the film and be able to see what kind of a player you're looking for. And when I put on each of those different players there, what I like is I like the flexibility that Bain has over a stiffer athlete in Bailey. And I like the fact that when you take a look at Ruben Bain Jr., as far as how he does in the run defense, he does a lot better than Bailey does against the run. One of the things I can at least kind of share here with my screen that's a good spot from Hayden Winks that talks about the draft metrics. He goes over and has a good showing of when you talk about pass rush win rate in college, it's something that really matters because you're going up against guys who are not going to be in the NFL. You want to win against the pass rate. And then there's going to be tackles per game when it's just against the run game. You can kind of see exactly, there's a chart here where David Bailey's probably the best overall pass rusher in the draft. But when it comes to who's the best pass rusher and run defender in the draft, aka a guy who can be a game wrecker for you, it's very clearly Ruben Bain Jr. And that was why I went with Bain Jr. with the 3rd overall pick over the likes of David Bailey. Although I will say to this degree, I'm not one of those. There's some people who I think are Bailey haters that pop up who are just look at the lack of some of that flexibility and think that he's just going to get locked up at the next level. I don't see that. I see him as a guy who's able to go out there similar enough to Josh Sweat as far as hitting a lot of these athletic measurables, being able to be a 10 sacks per season sort of a guy. I don't think that he's got a little bit higher bust potential as far as than Bain Jr. Bain's going to have the higher floor. Maybe Bailey has the higher ceiling, but ultimately I think that being such a well-rounded player and then still having some of that upside that Ruben Bain Jr. has is why I went with him for the 3rd overall pick.
Yeah, for sure. And I think with Bailey, there's also the questions of the character stuff, the anger stuff. So,
whereas Bain, he didn't get a haircut for the combine. Like he wasn't wearing designer clothes. Like he was all about football. I just live, eat, sleep, and breathe football. That's one of those players that when I see that personality thing and have it play out, it's a spot where, okay, that gives me enough confidence to know that you can be that guy who goes out there, plays football, can be able to, he was previously coached by Jason Taylor as well. Jason Taylor is probably one of the comps that I have for him at least is close enough to imagine if James Harrison had shorter arms. That's very similar as far as how they play. Harrison was known for actually having a little bit longer arms and a short body. He was only 6 foot tall, whereas Ruben Bain's 6'2", but at the 270 pounds, he's built like a bull so then you get kind of that bull in a china shop kind of game wrecker with low leverage that's able to kind of go past and win. I am one of those people who thinks that Bain's the best probable player in this draft. I still have Fernando Mendoza at number 1, but I think that it's probably when you look at the last 2 years of college football, Bain was maybe the best overall game wrecker, and he's a guy that a lot of people have seen falling even into the 9th or 10th pick. Some people wondered, could he fall into the teens? How does the NFL view him? Versus, I think, how individual scouts view him is going to be really interesting because what ultimately matters is how the Cardinals are going to view him.
Yeah, if they don't go Mauigoa, Bain's the guy I want. I'm with you on him. Real quick, give us just a quick thought process on your other picks, and then maybe we'll ask Kyler to give his feedback on your mock here.
Yeah, so with some of the other picks that are there, I tried in a lot of different ways to say, what can I do that's different than a lot of mock drafts? Because most people go pass rusher first, offensive tackle second. I did a lot of work to try to push an offensive tackle into the 3rd round. That was one of the biggest things that I tried to be able to do is to say, could I take another player in the 2nd round? And who would that player be in the 2nd round? So when I took a look and did mock drafts, probably about like 6 or 7 of them, there's the meme for you right there. Yeah. The meme that I think the Cardinals would have for mock draft scenarios is I think that the Cardinals, personally right now, their desire would be go ahead and take either the pass rusher or the pass protector and then trade up for Ty Simpson late first. But I think there's a growing belief that he's not going to be available with that, and if the Cardinals are going to trade up high enough to get him, it would probably cost your 2027 first-round pick, which I don't believe the Cardinals are willing to part with whatsoever. So I think that's where the predictive mock draft comes in, of what you think they will do versus what you would do, and kind of putting together in those situations. What I looked at in the second round was I didn't see Max Ionaker, who played right tackle for the Sun Devils, available. I looked at trying to see what would other picks look like at there. So there's guys like D'Angelo Pons at cornerback. There's a linebacker who I loved in Jacob Rodriguez. Every single time that I went and took the linebacker with that second pick, to be able to get some athleticism, some speed, try to find a potential Pro Bowl upside guy in the front seven to help with the defense, it felt like the offensive tackles did not fall there to how I wanted them to fall in round 3. And then every time that I ended up taking one of those guys that was in a separate spot, I couldn't get the cornerbacks that I wanted in round 3. So it was really interesting. I think if Gennings Dunker could be a guy that, let's say the Cardinals take a linebacker in pick 3 and then trade up for the tackle with that one pick that they have afterwards, that may be maybe your best case scenario of you get an edge rusher, you get a Pro Bowl upside guy at linebacker, you get a right tackle of the future who doesn't have to necessarily start this year. But I couldn't put that together in my mock draft. So I went with Caleb Lomu, who had played left tackle. A lot of people, I think, are overrating switching him from the left side to the right side, even though you can play backwards. There's tackles who do it every year. After playing on the left side, they spend their rookie year at right tackle. There's some growing pains that will pop up, but I think his will be fine. One guy I liked a lot, at least in one of the bigger needs for Arizona, is going to be at the cornerback spot. So while losing Jalen Thompson in free agency, the Cardinals have also lost Garrett Williams. And that's something that's really rough, because with Garrett Williams being lost, it means that the Cardinals don't have the starting slot corner. He played a little bit of outside, but it felt like it wasn't the best fit for him. Bringing someone in like Traden Stukes, who I think, at least from his placement in the NFL draft as a slot corner, would be one of those guys who could play slot/safety. The guy that I wanted and made a lot of sense in this spot in round 3 was Keontae Scott, but he would always go in the middle of round 2. Now, Keontae Scott was the cornerback out of Miami. He's also coached by one of the now cornerbacks coaches for the Arizona Cardinals, so that's a name that I think you're going to see mocked a lot to there. But when it came to Traden Stukes, he's a guy at 6'2", 200 pounds, who's at least I got the flexibility to play inside and outside. When you look at where he lined up in college, he lined up mostly out of the slot, and a couple of times he lined up actually in the box where he was able to play as a safety. But there's a really cool metric when it comes to him when you're talking about his athleticism plus how his man coverage grade went in college. So I'm going to add this little box here, but essentially when you take a look at past cornerbacks who had a relative athleticism score, so their size, their speed, their height, and how their athleticism performed in whether it's the 40-yard dash, the 3-cone drills, the different splits. There's only a couple of cornerback prospects who played out, and all of them have been rousing successes, such as J.C. Horn, Pat Surtain, Christian Gonzalez, and Cooper DeJean. Some other guys that are there, like you got a Bustin C.J. Henderson who's in there, but you've got Traden Stukes in that place. He's been one of the guys that I've really liked the more I've watched him, as far as he could come in, be your starting nickel corner, play some of that safety that you're missing at least, and allow Buddha and Rabbit to kind of play a little bit deeper sort of role. And then he could also be one of those guys that could take over, and you're in your last year of Garrett Williams, let another team take on that injury risk and be able to pay him. That's one of the things I went with Traden Stukes. Now, I'm going to go ahead and come back to the one obvious position that I think people will have some questions on in this group. Tim Keenan's a guy who's played everywhere from the A gap to the B gap. That gives you flexibility on the defensive line, Cole Wisniewski is someone, I think it's Wisniewski. There, I'm trying to think of how to pronounce that last name. It's hard with my braces here.
Yes.
Wisniewski. He played a lot of deep safety. That's something that Jalen Thompson played that allows Buddha to be in the box. He's a tall guy at 6 foot. I think he's 6'3", unless I'm mistaken. Tyron Montgomery was a guy who had a lot of play at the Senior Bowl at 6'2". He kind of the best explanation for what I saw him was he's one of those guys that would be the backup to Marvin Harrison Jr. He looks similar as far as the way that he plays the football, an outside possession receiver, and someone who isn't going to be a guy that is going to win tons of one-on-one matchups like that. But you watch him play, he's had some crazy one-handed catches, a guy that you take a flyer on in the late rounds who could then be your special teams player. And then you add another tight end just to kind of compete in the midst of the room, when Lake McCree, who's a little bit smaller, but I think that is able to get you another special teams player in this pick. The guy that a lot of people are going to question on, and this mock draft so that I had an F on was Cole Payton. Cole Payton, at I believe 6'4", left-handed quarterback coming out of North Dakota State. He's seen a lot of rise in the last couple weeks, and I think a lot of it is because you take a look at the 3 quarterbacks who you get to choose from in a shorter, maybe more Jimmy Garoppolo style quarterback. I'm out of LSU and Garrett Nussmeier. You look at the toolsy but never really put it together on the field guy in Drew Aller, and you got the guy who is a smart, consistent playmaker who doesn't have the physical tools in, I believe it would be coming out of Miami. I can't remember his name right now, but I'll get it in just a second here. Carson Beck, that's correct. The guy who has one of the top athleticism scores this year was able to be productive at a D1 school, of course, but he ranks in the top 5 of all athletics for quarterbacks. He's a guy who can run around and be able to make plays as well as having arm strength to push the ball deep. And I think at the end of the day, we're starting to see enough buzz that Cole Payton is not going to fall out of the top 5 quarterbacks this year because he has a mix of the physical measurables. He's one of the guys that I think when you're talking about taking a chance on Drew Aller never produced the way that he is needed to at the college level. I think that Beck is someone who did produce but doesn't have the physical measurables. And then you get a guy kind of in the middle between those two in Garrett Nussmeier who's had some injury issues. Cole Payton is the guy that actually checks each one of those boxes, and that's why I put him in here as the Cardinals taking a flyer on him for someone who could be maybe a developmental quarterback, but I could honestly see him getting maybe a couple of starts as a rookie late in the season if you're not in competition for anything, seeing what you have similar to what the Cardinals did a couple of years ago when they took a quarterback in the 5th round. Now, I don't expect it to be quite as bad as what they were able to get at least. But I think it is something that is definitely worth noting. If you're going to be taking a chance on a quarterback in this draft, I would much rather take a chance on one who's got the athleticism, athletic traits, or get a guy who's going to be a high-level backup. There's a chance that Cole Payton ends up with those physical traits, could be developed into a starter at some point, and having Matt Schaub work with him would be what I would try to have if I'm the Cardinals, and that would be the summary for my mock draft.
Okay. Well, thank you. Real quick, a couple of comments. Like Brian and Drew both noted that Lomu played right tackle but not well, and when they moved him to left tackle, he was much better there. So they questioned him as the tackle pick because he struggled at right tackle. We've got Lance who doesn't want to take Ty Simpson, but wants to trade back and build. Cardinals for the win. Lance, longtime supporter of the channel. Kyler, what are your thoughts on Blake's mock? Anything stand out to you? I mean,
overall,
out there.
Okay, yes. I will address this, Drew. I will address the allegations. Reuben Bain, I will not be upset at all if at number 3, Reuben Bain is the pick. Really, my 2 guys right now that I have zero problem with being the pick there are Reuben Bain and his teammate Francis Mauigoa. Either one of them, I think, are amazing picks. And I think we would do kind of exactly this. We would just address tackle with the best tier 2 tackle we could get at the top of round 2. Now, there are questions about that because there might be like 7 tackles going in the first round. About a month ago, we wouldn't have thought this, but they just keep rising. Max Ahinachor, I'm sorry. He has been rising up. The Clemson Blake Miller, he's been rising up. He's going in the first round now. So Caleb Lomu, though, if I am picking a favorite of the tackles between the 2 Utah tackles, it's actually him. I just like him better as a prospect than Spencer Fano. And at 39, it's better value than you're going to get with Spencer Fano. Now, the problem, as someone else mentioned, was the left tackle thing. Now, I know they switch all the time into the league, but there's a thing where he did play right tackle in college, wasn't great at it, moved to left and was fine. So some people just have like their positions that they play well, and they aren't super versatile. They're not like who's the free agent offensive lineman that we signed that's played like every position.
Wilkinson?
Yeah. He's played every single position on the line, basically. Not everyone's like that. But Caleb Lomu, I still think is a good player. And Traden Stukes. This is just because he's a Wildcat. Truly. It has nothing to do with the fact of him as a player. I saw earlier today from Justin Mello at Sports Illustrated reporting that he's met with the Cardinals, which isn't a report that I'd seen before, but apparently he has. And I mean, he's got great size. He's like that prototypical outside corner, and he graded insanely well. Like one of the best coverage corners in college football last year. So my only knock on that is in 3 years of Monty, we've drafted 7 cornerbacks, and you feel like it has to stop at some point. There has to be some draft where we finally don't take a cornerback, but I'm not sure there is. We have a lot of young cornerbacks in that room, but that is the strategy. It's just overloading the cornerback room, which is great because that position suffers a lot of injuries. So,
And that's part of the biggest area that's unfortunate is the Jalen Thompson departure plus the Garrett Williams injury. If Garrett Williams had not then had that Achilles injury and he's going into his contract year, this is the last year he's under contract.
Right.
There's a possibility that he goes out and plays super well and the Cardinals then miss out on a chance to extend him, or maybe just look at the injuries and go, we don't know if you're going to suffer another injury next year. We're going to let another team take the chance on you. Then all of a sudden you're missing now and having to rely on, we've already seen that they've got Will Johnson and Denzel Burke at least have been able to play well, but you're then going to have to rely on like some 6th round picks that you'll have there, or be able to hope that Star Thomas can make a comeback off of injury in the slot. It's a place where I would prefer to not have that addressed and would rather probably look at someone like Keontae Scott and then put him a little bit more at the nickel safety, be able to see at least as far as where that safety position could be. Long term, the Cardinals need to probably go back to having a strong safety who plays in the box, free safety who plays back. That's what more typical teams are going to play with, a little bit of mixing in between the two of them. And then you're going to have at least your nickel package with a big nickel who's going to be that guy who can cover tight ends out of the slot. If Garrett Williams was healthy, I don't think you have to worry about taking someone like Stukes as high as you would. You could fill that position easily with a linebacker. But with that injury, what we've seen at least is that the Cardinals have definitely struggled in the past game when they did have as many injuries as they did to the cornerback room last year. And as people always would say, like, hey, it can't get any worse than it did a year ago. And I'm the person who likes to come and say, look, it can always get worse. It doesn't mean that it will. It doesn't mean that you are automatically going to have more injuries to your corner room than you did a year ago. But that is a possibility. And that's something that when it comes to it with the Wildcats, I'm not one of those people who is opposed to like going rival school. All the family members I have are Michigan fans. So when you get Monty Ossenfort drafting everyone and their mother from Ohio State, and your family's all Michigan fans, you kind of get used to having to take guys from a rival school, even as an Arizona State graduate myself.
You know, and I had not been putting cornerbacks in my mock drafts up to this point, and because they had drafted 7 of them over the last 3 drafts. And then I tweeted this out. I think you both saw it. I did a little bit deeper analysis as to why did they bring back Murphy Bunting, right? Because he was kind of disappointing, especially in recovering from injury. And I looked at it and I saw, wow, like they had no one with significant snaps at slot. Like if Garrett Williams is injured, Murphy Bunting is the only guy in the roster with every other cornerback on the roster had less than 100 combined snaps in the slot.
They moved Keitrell Clark outside, and Marcos and I in our podcast talked about we love him in the slot, but he's better as an outside corner, and that he would still get beat occasionally deep because of his size. It just they don't have a slot guy outside of Murphy Bunting.
So I did that analysis. I tweeted out that like combined for it was 93 snaps in the slot amongst all of them. So I've come back around to this idea, okay, maybe they will take a cornerback. But I've also looked at Jalen Thompson played a lot of snaps in the slot, as you pointed out. And when you look at the guys they met with Stooks. He's listed here as a cornerback, but he's also thought of as a safety. And he played a lot, he played a lot of snaps at safety. He played more like that big nickel, right? And they met with Ramsey from Jamari Ramsey, I think it was his name. They've met with other safeties, but they haven't really met with a lot of pure cornerbacks, right? So I've really come back around to it, and we may see Stooks again today, hint, hint. The idea, I don't think they're taking a straight-up cornerback. I think they're taking a safety cornerback, flexible kind of a guy. And Stooks fits that, right? Yeah. So I like that pick for sure with where I'm seeing, and of course they met with him, so it makes sense, right? Well, yeah, I mean, listen, I'm with you. Bain at the top is a guy I love, and the idea of taking tackle later, something as we talked about. Peyton's interesting. I've heard people talk about him, as a possibility. So I like this mock, and I'll just mention on this, tight end is a position we don't look at a lot in these mocks, but I've heard a lot of people say that this is a really deep tight end class.
Yeah.
I was thinking it was Dane Brugler. I was listening to a podcast. He was talking about that how he just keeps going through his analysis. He keeps coming up more and more draftable tight ends, and I just have a feeling that there's a reasonable chance that late on day 3, just as you did, they're going to be sitting there looking at their board and saying, you know what, Tip Ryman coming back from injury. Yeah, we've got, Trey McBride. Yeah, but we could use a depth guy, a tight end who can play on special teams for us, someone who's good at blocking or something, right? So I like that.
The other thing I'll say, if you want to get crazy here with the Caleb Lomu at left tackle spot, is Cole Payton is a left-handed quarterback. So if you wanted to get crazy and just move Paris Johnson to that right side, I think most people are going to be content to keep him there. The last thing I did want to point out also was in my one trade back to get Caleb Lomu, I did pick up a 4th-round pick in 2027's NFL draft, which I think would be useful for trying to trade up either from, let's assume the Cardinals are going to have a top 10 pick. I don't think people are assuming that they're going to be worse than they were last year, although we'll have to find out. For all we know, this is the March for Arch for Arizona and Miami and the Browns or some other teams, but it is a spot where then that extra 4th could be utilized to trade back up into the 1st round. And so if you're in a place where you're wanting to address and get another spot in a better class next year, like let's say that Marvin Harrison Jr. hasn't been what you're looking for as far as a player, you can get a guy to pair with a quarterback at least to try to move for that one or move on from him. Yes. Then those are all possibilities that you at least have that flexibility with that extra draft pick for next year. And it's hard to get. Most teams are holding on very tightly to those draft picks. The reason why I picked the Browns is they've got 2 of them for next year, and so I thought it'd be a lot easier for them to give up 1 to move up a couple of spots. They were the ones who actually moved up for Max Ihienaker, and the Cardinals then just were able to take Caleb Lomu 4 picks later, and that was one of the strategies that I utilized to try to not just fill needs for the Cardinals, but also try to prep for the future as well.
Well, we are 50 minutes in, and we're going to get to our second mock draft. So
That's right.
TCR is in mid-season form right now. we're gunning for the 3-hour live streams that we used to hit. Kyler, you also did something a little freaky-deaky different in the first round. Some trades here. Why don't you walk us through your mock draft? What were you thinking, my friend?
Well, I wanted to have a little bit of fun with this. And one of the only scenarios I can see trading down into the middle of the first round is to take that in steps and in multiple trades, which is something that Monty is more than willing to do. He'll move around within rounds as much as he wants. So yeah, this one did get a little bit weird. I did trade down with the Bengals first, and then down again to 14. And I probably got some unrealistic stuff out of PFF from the Bengals, but this was all just about taking 2nd and 3rd round of possible picks from 2027 for what's supposed to be a much better draft class. Whether or not that's realistic this year, honestly, probably not. But in a scenario, just to play it out, if we could get there, which I think is Monty's preference, if we could do this, I still went tackle first. Just at 14, Mauigoa is not going to be available. So now you're talking about, I think, not the same player, but still a great tackle at 14, Monroe Freeling from Georgia. Like a month and a half ago, dude was going in the second round, and that is gone. He'll be gone by the middle of the first round now. Like I mentioned earlier, I think a lot of tackles are going to go in the first round, probably more than people think. And someone who has been falling lately, was a consistent first rounder for a long time, is Caleb Banks, the defensive lineman from Florida. Now, I think he had an injury thing come out. I think that's why he's falling a bit. But in this year, 2026, where we frankly don't expect to be very good, I think you can take that risk on some players that you think the injury is not that bad and will heal up completely, and you're stashing this great player who would have been a first rounder in most years and just had that unfortunate injury. And Caleb Banks, Drew is my source on a lot of these tackles. He is the one who has been giving me that 7 tackles in the first round number, and I trust Drew's analysis on that. And then third round edge, I went Danny Dennis Sutton from Penn State. He's in like solid tier 3 of the edges, I think. And he's the top of tier 3 or the bottom of tier 2, kind of depending on how you look at it. And he had a solid college career. I think he had 8 sacks last year at Penn State. He's a slightly similar player to a Josh Sweat, which is fine if that's how you want your pass rushers to work. Just get one to go on the edge opposite Josh Sweat and see what he can do there. And then Mike Washington, I also got. So true, Drew. Mike Washington, I also got with the extra third round pick that I got. He flew up the draft boards after his combine performance. He had an incredible combine performance. He was running in the 4.3s. I also like him because he played at my alma mater, New Mexico State, before he went to Arkansas. So he is a great player. And then round 4. Round 4 quarterback, you kind of have 3 major options. And I don't think any of them are wrong, because the goal of a 4th round quarterback this year is Jacoby Brissett is going to start, and then maybe you strike gold. Maybe your 4th round quarterback is just a god, and you can start him by the end of the season and get him some experience, or you can just let him sit and develop and be ready to start in 2027. Cool, and that's awesome if that happens. But if it doesn't, a 4th round quarterback is not going to prevent you from getting your quarterback in the 1st round next year. So I just went with Garrett Nussmeier here because I don't very often. But I think here, like round 4, you can get Drew Aller, Garrett Nussmeier, or Cade Klubnik. Take your pick, which player you think is the best fit for what you want to do, and see if it works. If it doesn't, you're not dead in the water. And then future rounds, I have Max Llewellyn, another edge from Iowa. I took a guard in round 6, which seems pretty typical, going for guard a little bit later. And then I did get a safety here with Robert Spears-Jennings in the 7th round. I've been a proponent all this offseason that I think safety and tight end are very much in play somewhere. Those positions won't surprise me, even though I don't want to say like ignorant fans, but maybe fans that aren't as in tune with the roster might think, well, we have Budda Baker and we have Rabbit and then we have Trey McBride and we have Tip Ryman. Why would we possibly get either of those positions? But I think replacing JT will be a little bit harder than we think, and Rabbit is not the perfect replacement for what JT did. So a lot of my mocks, I didn't get him in this one, but like round 5 or round 6, a guy I love is Bishop Fitzgerald from USC. I think he would be a really good guy who does a lot of what JT does up top, free safety guy. And then tight end, I've taken... Max Bredesen, Michigan, a lot in like round 6, round 7, because he's one of the best blocking tight ends in this draft, like incredible blocking tight end. And I think that's what we would want if we went for another tight end, because we've got Trey and we've got Elijah Higgins, who are both good pass catchers, and we've got Tip, but with how much Mike LaFleur ran 13 personnel in LA last year, I think tight end's super in play. So regardless, this is my mock. We got a few pickups from what's supposed to be a much better class next year, and I think we still addressed the needs, just some different players than we usually get, because I'm picking at a few different spots here.
Blake, quick thoughts on Kyler's mock draft.
Yeah, I think a lot of people. The Monroe Freeling is going to be a name that rises a lot. I could see him go as early as 6 to the Browns, because out of all the tackles this year, he is the one clear left tackle that makes a lot of sense, because he's actually played left tackle at a high level, and is, when you're talking about like Mauigoa being a right tackle, I think Fano is someone who, because of whether it's the arm length, I think they'll try him out at tackle, but he seems like he's going to be much more of a fit at right tackle as well. So Lomu would be like the first left tackle, and he's by most people seen as a second round prospect. So you're talking about at least having a guy that is probably going to be for some teams, he may be their top tackle that's ranked. I think that the biggest thing with all of this is that you're at least addressing the lines with the first couple of players. Mike Washington Jr. is an interesting one, because I think that it's one of those guys where he's both going to be boom or bust in terms of there's a couple of other guys that he reminds me of, but having that athleticism that he has is something that you get good coaching that's able to take that athleticism and mold it, and I think that could be a success. I still don't think that he's going to be a lead back, but if you're talking about, hey, he's the guy who's going to come in and 2 games a year when our starter is out, he can manage the load. Perfect. Like, the best up case for him would be if you can get a DeAndre Swift out of him, someone who's never going to be like one of the top running backs, but is someone who is either going to be a really capable running back in a team as second back, or could be a guy who's like, hey, guess what? He's going to run the ball for us, and then we'll probably draft a running back next year to be able to take over for him, but he's still going to be capable. Out of the 3 quarterbacks you mentioned, Nussmeier is my favorite. He does have probably some of the different issues like we've talked about, and I think that he's more of a Garoppolo type. He's also had some injury questions, but he's got the reticent arm strength. He's a smart decision maker, is able to get the ball where it needs to go. And he does have the ability as far as with scrambling. It's kind of like the best way that someone put it was, if you want to take a look at and put on the tape between Ty Simpson and Garrett Nussmeier, there's not as much of a gap between the two of them as you'd think. As far as where it comes, it's just that Nussmeier at least doesn't have some of the same physical tools as far as some of the crazier throws Ty has made, but he does have the ability to be able to be controlled and run an offense effectively. And then, of course, getting to the end, like you're talking about Robert Spears-Jennings, I see him as someone I take a lot in the late rounds of finding that late round safety. We'll see how it goes with the Cardinals, because the draft last year, I know that was one of the things that I was curious about was they ended up taking, I believe it was in round 7. Keaton Crawford, as far as playing that deep safety role. Putting Robert Spears-Jennings in competition with him and then having whoever's the best man wins would be one of those ways of getting competitive play out of the safety position. But overall, I felt like you did a good job of addressing the lines. The biggest question, of course, obviously here is going to be not the interior of the offensive line, because you addressed that late, but there's a lack of quarterback. A lot of people are you did get a quarterback with Nussmeier. I should say the lack of a cornerback is going to be something that the Cardinals usually have drafted a corner, so the fact that you're not going with one means Cardinals are going to be relying on their draft picks that they had with whether it's Max Melton, do they have Elijah Jones get in there? One of the things we haven't really talked about as much is Max Melton seems like he's been on the hot seat. Maybe he gets traded. Elijah Jones hasn't ever played for the Cardinals. Those are 2 day 2 picks that they've had. If you don't trust those guys, do you take a cornerback? And in your case, you're saying, let's roll with Max, let's roll with Elijah Jones, let those draft picks play it out, and let Denzel Burke take over. And I don't really have a problem with that approach either. I didn't take that in my mock draft, but I don't have a problem with avoiding cornerback in the mock drafts either.
Yeah. Real quick, just a couple things. Robert noting that, Banks, it's a foot injury, right? You know, they think
Yeah.
he wasn't the one they said with the broken foot did all the drills and stuff, which is impressive, but it's also a big concern for interior defensive linemen, foot injuries. And then, Drew saying that Washington Jr. could be our new Chase Edmonds. So interesting kind of comp there. And that you hate Elijah Higgins. That's confirmed.
I don't. He's fine.
He's
He's a receiver at least who can kind of block, you know.
yeah.
To Mike Washington, like, I don't think this team likes Trey Benson very much.
Yeah.
And James Conner is very old. So if you're looking to have a paired combo of running backs for the future, then a Tyler Algier, who's more of the Conner, and a Mike Washington, who's more of the Chase Edmond, that could work.
I will say I've moved away from taking running backs, and part of this influence is looking in how this is not a great running back class.
No.
And really bad. And maybe I was influenced, but the guy who does That Franchise Guy, I forget his name. I follow him on Twitter, but interesting stuff. He used to work for PFF. He has a YouTube channel, and he went through the rankings of the running back positions, and he watches film and stuff, and he was really down on this class outside of Jeremiah Love, and that just not a good class. And running back is one of those positions that you can draft and plug a guy in right immediately.
Yeah.
So
a lot of times it takes halfway through your rookie year.
Marcus.
It takes halfway through your rookie season, I think, at least, is what the normal place is for them to get good at pass protection. But you can scheme them into having good running plays like David Johnson when he came into the Cardinals. I've actually, in a lot of the mock drafts that I've, started to do for 2027, I know I'm crazy, but when I take a quarterback with the first pick, I take a running back with that second pick to kind of be the starting running back, and then have Tyler Algier take over, and then James Conner, if he wants to stick around for, another role, he can. But I've looked at 2027 in a much better running back class from what we know of trying to get a running back as far as taking over for that, and then giving Trey Benson kind of his last shot, his last opportunity to seize everything he ever wanted. This in this class, the Eminem. This is what I have for him this year.
Right, and so for that reason, in similar philosophy, Blake is that I am not really taking running backs anymore. In this year's mock, because we have Connor and Algier, and we're not contending this year. We don't need to have an optimized running back room. We just need one that will work and keep things going. And next year we have Algier for the pass blocking, on the third down, so we can draft a guy, let him, step in next year like that. And it's just not a great class to get that running back. So for me, I'm just looking at passing on that for this year, right? For that reason. So we're going to get to my mock draft, and I will tell you, some of the players on my mock draft, in fact, a lot of them are players that Cardinals have met with. Part of this was influenced. I've been doing just a lot of kind of diving into some different analysis. I showed you, the arm length thing that we did earlier with a little help from Gemini, and I did a little bit of analysis. Asked Gemini to look at the history of players the Cardinals have met with in combine and visits and things like that, top 30 visits. And looking for patterns, and there's a couple things. One, I think 75% of the time in Monty Ossenfort's time with the Cardinals, the players taking the first 3 rounds, they've had meetings with 75% of them. So in the early rounds, those meetings are very, very important in terms of guys they take. And later rounds, there's still a pretty good rate of that. So, those meetings aren't everything, but I look at them as players that they like. And if they've if guys that have injury concerns or character concerns, they met with them twice, typically, right? So that's a thing I look at. That, they met with Mauigoa twice. That's not an injury or character thing. It's more an arm length thing. They haven't met with Bailey twice. Maybe it's nothing, right? But that's the thing to me. But some of the guys I've taken on here, like Law is the guy they've been reported to have met with. Xavier Harris they met with. Traden Stukes they met with, right? So I went with Mauigoa for this one because of all the reasons we've talked about. I go back and forth, but I think they're in on him. So I think there's a good chance they do take him there. They trade back, that'd be great, but I didn't do that. Zion Young is an edge rusher they met with. He's one of the guys that should be there on day 2. So if you pass on edge and you wait, and then you go tackle early, I think you're getting an edge rusher somewhere there. So that's who I took. He was, one of the guys that was available, a little bit of a taller, bigger edge rusher, right? A guy who's versatile, can play some different fronts for them. And then I went with Stukes, right? A guy they met with in the 3rd round. In a lot of the mock drafts, sometimes he goes right before this pick, so I was lucky that he was there. Maybe they have to trade up for a little bit to get him, maybe they don't. But they've met with a couple guys with this profile, right? The big nickel slot/safety. Xavier Harris, right? A nice kind of big, physically reminds you of Calais Campbell in terms of just the size. Different player, but a guy that you could add a defensive line to develop. Caleb Alarms or had a really nice combine, very physically gifted linebacker. Sometimes they go linebacker earlier, but here I have them taking another guy to put into the mix. Kendrick Law, receiver that and Drew's saying he's a great Dortch replacement. He's on his short list of preferred late round wide receivers, and they were reported to have met with him, at least based on the reporting I saw. So have them go with a receiver a little bit late. They don't need starting receivers like we talked about, but they need some depth. Mm-hmm. And then a guy we talked about already, Max Bredson, right? That I already talked about earlier. I think when they're sitting there in late day 3 looking at that board, it's going to be hard to pass on the tight ends with how deep that class is. And I went with him because he was arguably the best blocking tight end, in the draft, or at least certainly on day 3. So that's kind of what I went with. Brian saying an F for 6th round pick is diabolical. What the crap PFF? Come on, man! It's a 6th round pick. If I can click the mouse and pick a guy, I think that's at least a C, right? If I
you get the F though, if you want to take that jacked long snapper, that guy who's super athletic, right. At least I'll still give you an F because you're drafting a long snapper. But hey, at least you're being creative with your picks.
Yeah,
trying to have the most athletic long snapper in the NFL, see if it gives you an advantage.
Yeah, for sure, right? So this is kind of what I went with here. Blake, give me your feedback. Roast me real quick.
I don't think we need to roast as much because I think there's not a person alive who would look at Francis Mauigoa and then say that's a bad pick if the Cardinals took him at 3. I think you could call it a bit of a reach, but I don't think that people would look at that or would storm the gates. For me, that was the pick where I felt like it was taking him over some of the other players would be the case. The one that I remember, of course, was back in 2000 and I believe it was 2020. I had Tristan Wirfs and I had CeeDee Lamb much, much higher than I had Isaiah Simmons. And so for me, that was like I'll storm the gates sort of a pick. For this one, I may have Bain higher, I may have Baylor higher, but I'm not going to storm the gates at least if it's going to be something with Francis Mauigoa. I think with Zion Young, that's going to be an interesting one because we've already talked about Stukes. Zion Young is someone who's a great run stuffer. He has length, he's got athleticism, he's got upside as a pass rusher, but he hasn't developed there. If he develops there, it's going to be really, really stellar. The biggest thing, at least right now, is you're looking at his floor right now is basically Zaven Collins. So you're talking about getting a cheaper version of Zaven Collins in for the next 4 years or so. And that would be your floor. Your ceiling is going to be higher because he actually has the length and the room to grow, and then you're hoping that your pass rush coaches can get the most out of him. I think there may be better overall pass rushers, but they're not going to be guys that have the same floor as him. So it's one of those picks where I think I would probably look at a different edge rusher personally, but that's my personal preference. Other than that, I like the rest of the picks for where they're at for the most part. I will say that Xavier Harris has way too many consonants in his name for me to be able to take it seriously. That's the thing. But Bredesen, at least for the blocking that you're going to get in late rounds, I've kind of come around to that. There's another guy that PFF has a lot of times in those mock draft simulators that's at the very late rounds, Oscar Delp, and I gotta say, I started taking Oscar Delp in the 7th round. He's probably going to go in the top 100 players. He's not going to be there. It would not shock me if Bredesen ends up seeing his draft stock go up where he's in the top 150 players, whereas we're seeing him constantly go in these round 7 picks, so I think that's a good value for him there as well.
Cool. Kyler, what do you think? You're muted, buddy. Kyler
we'll never know. I guess we'll never know what he thinks.
Yeah, I guess we won't know what he thinks. Hello, Kyler. Can you hear us? We can't hear you, my friend. So Kyler is muted.
Can you hear me?
Now we hear you. All right.
He's back.
Woohoo! Thank God.
So Kendrick Law, I love that pick. Like Drew said, as a Greg Dortch replacement, it's pretty much spot on. I just pulled him up. Yards per route run, 1.84. That sounds like Greg Dortch if I ever heard
Dortch,
it.
all right.
Let's see. Screen catches, he had the 10th most in college football. He had 32. He had the 6th most screen yards, 279.
Don't tell Cliff. He might take him before us.
All right. And yards after catch, he's also
Going
tied
with the
for
Rams.
sixth.
Going with the
So,
Rams.
but he also has one drop, which is nice. So maybe he's a little bit of an upgrade on Dortch, which was always my thing with Dortch. I loved him as a player. He's a fan favorite. He probably stuck around a little bit longer than he should have from a pure talent perspective. I think we could have replaced him last year.
He also
which
was
is very
healthy.
unpopular opinion.
That's the other thing too. Dortch was always someone who all of the receivers in front of him got hurt, and he would still be there. And then every once in a while, he would get hurt when it felt like it was his time to break out because he was so small. So it was a unique experience of having the Greg Dortch spot where you're like, wow, Greg Dortch just went for 7 catches and 70 yards and a touchdown when the one time he got to play because the other guy in front of him is hurt. But he could never put up consistently 7 catches for 70 yards for a whole season like those number 1 guys can.
I know, and it was frustrating. And he's a little Kendrick Law's a little bit bigger. He's 6 foot, 205. So some of the size concerns are less there. And I think we have some great options on the outside. Michael Wilson had his breakout. I still believe Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to get there. So having a nice upgrade in the slot, I think, would be really nice. So Kendrick Law is someone I like quite a bit from this. And Zion Young, too. I've talked about him on these streams before. I think Zion Young is the top of tier 2 of the edge rushers. And I think he's a really solid pick there in round 2.
Cool. Well, that's what I went with. And now we're going to get on to the viewer mocks. Now, for the sake of time, being that we're an hour and 15 minutes into our stream, for each mock draft, just highlight one pick, max 2 that you like or that you want to comment on, and briefly as we go through these, and we'll just kind of shotgun through these, rapid fire through these. First, we have Lance, who was in the stream with us. He's got Spencer Fano, Caleb Banks, Keontae Scott, Trayden Stukes, Dunker, Branch.
Ooh, he's got Dunker at offensive guard. Now that would be a fun play. I think Dunker could play guard or tackle.
Dane Durant, Cole Payton, Bryce Botcher, and then he's got a trade for number 2. So, all right, Blake, why don't you jump in? Maybe pick one player and talk about it.
I mean, we've already talked about Stukes, and getting Stukes and Scott is great as far as if you're able to do that many trade backs, but Malik Benson is great value at like round 116. Like that's one of those guys that would come in and maybe outplay Kendrick Bourne in year 2. Other than that, getting Scott and Stukes, those are 2 corners who also have safety ability. So you're talking about we're wiping the slate clean with Max Melton. We're just going to do whatever we can to get both of those guys onto our roster. Right, the slate clean with Max Melton and with Elijah Jones.
Tyler.
This has less to do with any player talent, but I did not watch a bunch of Iowa football this year. I'll admit that. But I want someone who looks like Dunker on this team so bad. I will just bet that he'll turn out to be at least a decent pro just because of his hair. It's incredible.
We've been missing that since Gardeck left us for the Jacksonville Jaguars. So
and I mean he's built great too. He's 6'5", 318. But the mullet, that red mullet, get him on this team right now. If nothing else, for the vibes between him and Gardner Minshew. Like, we're not going to win a lot of games in 2026, but the vibes would be kind of neat between those two. I think that could be very fun.
Yeah. If you wanted to have my dream draft would be you take Bain at 3, you get Ian Aker at your second round pick, and then you get Jacob Rodriguez with your second pick, and you get Gennings Dunker to be your long-term right tackle
Yeah.
with your third pick. I would love that sort of setup where you actually have a speed talent at linebacker for the first time in forever. Like it wouldn't be a round 1 pick, so we're avoiding the Steve Keim area. But
Yeah.
Gennings Dunker, if he's able to fall to round 3, like that would be my dream scenario for getting him in at an offensive tackle spot for the Cardinals. I just have never been able to get there in my mock drafts. He's always gone too early for that, or if he does fall to there, I'm not able to get the linebacker I want. So it's just it's crazy as far as with how these Iowa guys have turned out to be so well in the NFL.
Real quick, Malik Benson, a fast receiver. One of the things we've talked about is, like, you figure LaFleur probably wants a yak guy for the Shanahan thing, but they could use a speed receiver. They don't really have that, so that's a guy that you could get if you got him late to add some speed. I like that. Real quick, Drew's mentioning Butcher was a linebacker. Got some love early, has been forgotten about. Grades pretty well. With Jack Gibbons signing, getting Bryce would great. I still think they could get a linebacker. Brian thinks that you need to grow a mullet, Kyler. I co-sign on that.
I agree.
Yes. Yuma Drew, what is up? Thanks for joining us. What's up, Burgang Y Town in his house? Hello, Yuma.
Nice. Hey, Yuma.
So thank you for being with us. So yeah, all right. So let's move on to the next one real quick, and let's highlight a player. We've got Bain, Hiachinor. I don't know. I'm never going to get it right. Grayson Halton, Newsmeyer, Wisniewski, Red Murdoch, and Eric Gentry. A couple linebackers. So Blake, pick a player or two and give us a quick note.
So I'm going to pick this whole draft because I've actually made this mock draft myself before, with the exception of Red Murdoch out of there, but being able to get Bain, Ian Aker, getting an upside guy in Grayson Halton, taking your quarterback, and then of course we talked about Wisniewski, and Gentry is someone who he's at 6'6", I think is what he measured in as a linebacker, so he's got length for days. Don't know how that'll do as far as leverage, but if you're talking about a guy that maybe can be a coverage linebacker and seeing about that athleticism, like
block kicks
is great. But Grayson Halton's someone we haven't talked about enough, at least I think, is if you're not going to go for, if I wasn't going to go for a cornerback with my third pick and locked into having one of those corners, Halton would have been one of those defensive linemen that I would have definitely taken in round 3. I think you just need to flood the position with talent on the defensive line.
Yeah. Kyler, what do you think? Kyler?
Yes, I am here. I am this time, I promise. Max
Yes.
is a player I like, but we just haven't seen him play a lot of football. Like, that's sort of his whole thing. He hasn't played a ton of football, so there's a lot of unknown there. He did really well in the invite bowl games after the season. Like, that's where he really made a name for himself. I don't think he was on many boards before that, really. He just played really well in those, and I would be good with him at that spot. I just kind of doubt at this point he makes it to the second round. I really don't think he will. But if somehow he does sneak to the very, very top of round 2, I would be so happy with getting him and Reuben Bain. That's a great 1-2, because I think Max is a better potential tackle at round 2 than the best potential edge that we could get at round 2 if we skip those top tier guys.
Yeah, I've had a lot of times where I've actually given up the 4th round pick to trade up for Max just to see if I could be able to get him and Bain together, and then traded down for my 3rd round pick at least. But then in that case, when the mock draft, I just left out a quarterback that I took in my leaving that out for the 4th round. So I think that's definitely the highlight player for me would be Max.
If Max is there at 34, I am running up to the podium. I just don't think he's going to be there. And he hasn't played a lot, but like, everyone I've heard talk about him talks about he has all those natural talents that you just can't coach. Like, he has those things, and he's just a guy that you're willing to bet on is going to become a really good tackle with a little coaching. So I love that. Halton tore up the combine and the pre-draft process, and he's a small defensive interior lineman who's really twitchy, and just love him as a disruptive kind of player. And Murdoch's interesting, Buffalo, small school kind of guy, but graded in the 90s. So interesting, guy to look at there. So, yeah, Yuma Drew likes this draft. So, All right, so next one we're going to bring up is Brian's. Brian has Ruben Bain. He's got a little bit of a trade thing going on to move back up and get Spencer Fano. And then Emmanuel Pregnon, the Almighty chart does not approve of your second round pick, Brian, but we'll allow it. Deontay Lawson, linebacker. Tariq Sapp, defensive lineman out of Florida. Then Bishop Fitzgerald, a guy you mentioned earlier, and then Mikhail Kamara, edge out of Indiana. So, Blake, thoughts?
Yeah, I like the Lawson pick at linebacker because that fits with what we know from Monty. Like, big school guy. He's someone who's a day 3 linebacker that you're then taking. What's interesting about this mock draft here, honestly, like we have to talk about it, is the trade where you take Bain and then you give up pick 65, a fourth in 2027, and Josh Sweat to be able to get Spencer Fano. I would say unless you're going to be getting that trade up and giving that up for a quarterback, I think that giving that up just for an offensive lineman is going to be tough. Now, let's say that you took Francis Mauigoa and then traded up to number 12 and got Ruben Bain, who fell down over there. Then all of a sudden you're talking about that for positional value being huge. I think you're going to have to be sold enough that Fano is going to be a Pro Bowl caliber tackle, and then be able to look at saying, you know what, Josh Sweat, he may have asked for a trade request from what we had heard of. I think the best case scenario for the Cardinals, though, is trying to pair Josh Sweat with a pass rusher like Bain or like being able to get Mauigoa in there and pair it with another player. Like, I think that's, and then keeping Josh Sweat. It's not like a move that I think is going to be too disappointing. I think it'd be a fascinating exercise if you were going to say, hey, we're going to fix our offensive line completely by then saying we're going to use that next pick on a guard, and suddenly we're going to have probably the best offensive line in the NFC West in addition to getting Ruben Bain. That's what I think he wanted to do with this mock draft, and so I praise the creativity.
Yeah. Kyler.
Spencer Fano, I'm so torn on him as a player, and like trading around to get him doesn't strike me. There are other players that I would think of doing that, of playing this like draft calculus for. Spencer Fano just wouldn't be it for me, if I am being honest there. But I mentioned when I was talking about my own, Bishop Fitzgerald, somewhere between like round 5 and 7. I like him a lot, just because I think he can take what JT was doing and do it really well, even as a rookie. I think he could come in and do that relatively well. And safety isn't something that I think we need to go above round 5 for. And Bishop Fitzgerald is usually slotting in somewhere there on day 3. So he's my favorite pick from this one, actually, other than Ruben Bain, who's great, but we don't need to talk about him anymore. Bishop Fitzgerald.
I'm happy to talk about Bain, so that's always me.
Great player, but Bishop Fitzgerald, I like to take him a lot when I can get him.
So a couple things. Brian's asking what this trade, because I know it's hard to see. In this draft, mock draft, what Brian traded was our 3rd round pick, number 65, a 4th round pick for 2027, and Josh Sweat. For
it's too much for me.
Yeah, but hey, listen, I appreciate mixing it up though, right? Because a lot of these mocks start to look very same, right? So, and I intentionally do the same thing, kind of mix. I don't usually do the trade thing, but I mix things up like that. So, yeah, I do appreciate it. You, Miss Drew, saying pregnancy classic, don't overthink it type draft pick. Yeah. And generally, I agree. He's good, really good guard.
He may go first round at the end of the day. Like, he could be the Gray Zabel, who last year was the left tackle that became an all-pro guard from immediate, and that's a very good comp for him that could happen.
But I cannot mock him to the Cardinals, not because I don't like the player, but because if you're new here, they've got the almighty chart thing that I do, which is the draft history, and the bottom line is Monty Austinfort and the teams he came from do not take interior offensive linemen before the 3rd round. There's a long track record of that, and until I see him take a guard or center before round 3, I'm never going to mock one there, because it's such a consistent pattern. They have not, like, the Patriots did not do that in the time he was in their front office. The Titans didn't in a couple years, and he has not done it here. Yeah, so you're familiar with the chart. Yeah. So I love the player, and if I'm a team, and if a team takes him late first round, early second round. I'm not going to say it's a bad pick. I just can't predict the Cardinals doing that until I see Monty show me he's willing to, if that makes sense. But the one other thing I also mentioned, kind of like Bishop Fitzgerald, I've also been a big fan of him, and I've talked about him. I did a tweet about this. He's been a lot on my mocks. He looks like kind of a version of, Jalen Thompson in terms of the position, how he plays the position, slot, versatile. The one thing that has given me pause is I recently watched, I think it's the NFL Stock Exchange, right, and their analysis, and they did their top safeties. And when they got around to Bishop Fitzgerald, the one knock they had on him was his athleticism isn't as good as some of the others. So I still think he's draftable. I think he's a nice guy to have in your rotation. That's given me pause in terms of being as high on him. But the player profile reminds me of Jalen Thompson. So, again, listen, you look at my old mock drafts, he was in almost all of them for the same reasons. But new information, obviously we get new information throughout this whole process, and that has given me a little bit of pause.
Right.
But, yeah, so next mock draft, we have Gazornik, who starts with a trade back. Now, his trade, let's see, there's a couple of them. I think he traded back and he got for number 11, got a third round, and then got a second, a couple thirds next year.
Ooh.
Listen, if you can get 2027 picks, do it, right? So that's awesome. Then he's got a little bit trade back later just to move back a couple spots.
You get that. You could trade up to like the number 2 pick probably for a quarterback if you wanted to with that amount of draft capital.
Right, next year. So listen, if you can swing that, I'm doing it 6 days a week, twice on Sunday. So he trades back, takes Fano, right, a tackle that I like. Again, Mauigoa is ahead of him, but we like him as a player. He takes Pregnon. He's also ignoring the almighty chart, but we'll forgive it. We'll allow it. Jake Holday, a linebacker of Cincinnati. Elijah Sarrett, wide receiver of Indiana. Jonah Coleman, running back in Washington. Dante Corleone, defensive line out of Cincinnati. Got a couple Cincinnati defenders. Michael Taff, I'm not sure if I pronounced that, safety out of Texas. And Pat Coogan, IOL out of Indiana. Blake, give us your thoughts or kind of identify a player here that you might.
I think it's pronounced Toffee, and Coogan are two of my favorites to take late because I think that's like your replacement eventually for getting your safety, your center, I should say, at least, to be able to get that. I like Taffy as well as a deep safety. The biggest one, at least, with this sort of scenario is you're trying to say that you're going all in on next year's draft, and in this scenario, what would be the cost for Miami to trade up and getting that number 3 overall pick? My guess is it would be for a wide receiver to pair with their quarterback, and they'd be going all in on this current staff. I don't know how real that may be, at least for it to be Miami of all teams, but I like it for this scenario in that you're able to essentially just say, we're going to fix our offensive line. We're going to add a bunch of weapons, at least in the around on the receiver spot, and then get a couple of defenders in there. We're going to go all in on trading up for our quarterback next year, or having more picks in what's going to be a loaded draft. I like how the approach is. I think that if this was a mock draft that Monty Austinfort could basically control reality, I think this would be the sort of scenario that Monty Austinfort would love, to be able to trade back and get more of those picks for next year. I don't know if Monty is able to control whatever that is in this current reality because of the lack of quarterback or Will Anderson necessarily, but I really like the picks that are there. Surratt is someone we haven't talked about enough. I think that he ends up going in the top 70 picks when it all is said and done as well. He's a good receiver.
Kyler.
I was going to pick Surratt as my guy here. I think he is a good player, but he is a question to me about fit for receivers. So
Right.
Kendrick Law, your choice for the slot receiver. I think that's the type of receiver that we would possibly take in this draft if we do go wide receiver at some point. Surratt is like 6'2", 200 something, and he's an outside receiver. It's not really something that is top of the priority list, and I think we could address some other needs there around pick 4. He's a really good player. I do think so. I just think for the Cardinals, he's not the fit. And Pregnon there at 34, is he worth that? Probably. But as Joe has said several times, we don't have any evidence that this staff or this front office is going to be willing to go that high for a guard. So he'll be a great player for someone. And Spencer Fano at 11, if you do have this holiday of trades that happen and you do get down to between like 11 and 16 and you're looking at different tackles, if Monroe Freeling is there, that's who I would take at 11. But I would be a lot more comfortable with Spencer Fano there at the 11 to 16 than any higher than that.
Yeah, I tell you, Jonah Coleman is a guy I really quickly mentioned, a guy who I used to take a lot of mock drafts. You know, some people have him as a second best running back. Some people, have Price. But again, I was watching Marcus Whitman again in his running back tiers, and he is really down on Coleman. Thinks that he doesn't have him ranked anywhere near the top of his running back in what is already a bad running back class. So he thinks he's more of a backup. So I don't know. I think for me it comes back again to I'm so down on this running back class now that I just really feel like there's no one I want to take in this class.
And Taylor Algier really changed the calculus for taking running back this year. Oh, yeah. You just don't have to this year. It's not necessary. So unless you love someone or they're great value on day 3, then I agree. We're probably not going to see one.
Yeah. And also real quick, Grandizer, I put this comment up. Grandizer is a Dolphins fan, so he follows them, so he knows this, that their new GM wants more picks. He's not trading up. But, still, it's not, we can always imagine. All right. So, okay. Thank you, Brian, for that mock. Next, we have Breadstick Daddy. I haven't seen him in the chat, but that's Austin Hoy. He's also active in the Discord. He's got a trade back and then Bailey. Then he's got Simpson, Pregnon, another guy. Stukes shows up again. Markel Bell, tackle in the 4th round. Tim Keenan, defensive lineman. Caden Curry out of Ohio State edge. Then our buddy Eli Heidenreich, who was starting to look like he was going to be the he's on every mock draft kind of a guy, and then we kind of moved away from him a little bit. But Blake, thoughts?
Yeah, what I like about this is that it seems like in this case the Giants are trading with you to get up ahead of the Titans for Jeremiah Love. Mm-hmm. So I think that is one of the biggest areas where that is a realistic possibility. And then in this spot here, if Ty Simpson is going to be in a place where he falls, I think that he would go all the way to 34. I think that's one of the places where out of all the teams, the one that has the biggest quarterback need for a quarterback from this year's draft is probably the Cardinals, because of the Jets moving for Geno Smith. So when you're talking about those being the different places, you're able to say, hey, can we get a quality edge rusher and a guy who can start at quarterback? That's where I think a lot of people are locking the Cardinals into Bailey. What I like about this one here is he then still gets some guys that we've talked a lot about here, but he picks up a tackle in Markel Bell, who the coaching staff that we hired from would know about him. So I think that's one of the picks that I like the best is if you're going to be talking about a developmental right tackle that could potentially take over a year from now, Bell would be the one guy there. And he's then going to capitalize. But it comes down to ultimately how you feel about Ty Simpson. I would say that Simpson is probably the most polarizing player in this draft. And it's crazy because he's pretty much consensus quarterback 2. It's just people are not sure where he's going to go. I think that him going at the top of round 2 would be the right place for him.
Kyler.
Ty Simpson is the most polarizing guy. You'll hear some commentators say that he's actually the most talented quarterback from a pure talent perspective in this class. He just is held back by the fact he's only played 13 games in college, which is the part about him that holds me back the most. It's just a lack of playing time. That's scary when you're going from college to the pros, which is already such a leap. It's real scary for a quarterback, of all positions, a quarterback, to have such little starting experience. But I'll kind of be surprised if he's there at 34. Quarterbacks, regardless, they are a quarterback. It's the most important position in the game. And so every year, seemingly, someone you don't think is going to go or doesn't deserve to go at a certain point in the first round will, because it's just the most important position in football. So the Jets have a pick mid-first round. I could see him going there. I would struggle to see Ty Simpson making it to 34 right now, which means then you have that gap until like round 3 or 4 where you start taking the Allers and Nussmeyers and Klubniks. So like that's why I don't really take quarterback in round 2 anymore, because it just doesn't seem feasible. But this trade back, the 3 to 5 trade back, is one of the ones that I like to play around with the most, because it seems like one of the most realistic ones. And David Bailey, he's a great player. I worry about the character stuff, and I wonder if this front office would actually do that. As someone who like has questions about their character, legitimate ones, not like Walter Nolan doesn't have a good work ethic, but like David Bailey likes to stomp players' faces and try to choke reporters. Like, that's not great, and I'm not sure that the Cardinals are gonna spend such a high pick on a player like David Bailey.
Well, I mentioned earlier the kind of at least the analysis that I had AI help me with on the visits when they've that in past when they've had guys that they were meeting that they drafted that were maybe a little bit of question marks, whether it be injuries or maturity. Because like for example, like Walter Nolan, it wasn't off the field trouble. It was just
Right.
more of a question of his maturity. Right, which I'll live with that, right? But they've with those kinds of guys, they met with them twice,
Right.
combine and a 30 visit or something else if they drafted them, and they haven't met with Bailey twice that I've seen, right?
Yeah.
So
You'll know very quickly, I think, too, with a lot of prospects if they have the mental makeup for the NFL or not. Like, I remember, like, there was guys with Ron Brown went, I got to stop eating fast food if I'm going to make it in this league. And then you talk to Robert Kimdichie, and he's like, oh, man, I make weight. They don't care what you eat. And it became very apparent that one guy, and then you look at Walter Nolan this year, he basically is like, I want to be great. I want to do this. He made changes. He got injured, of course. But you look at how he basically stayed glued to Calais asking him questions. You could kind of tell that, and it played out on the field, that he was the most impressive rookie that we saw last season when he was able to play. So it's something that I think with David Bailey, you'll be able to know very quickly once that becomes a reality. You'll see. The question, of course, is do you want to take that risk and then find out what you don't want to find out with David Bailey once you actually have spent that draft capital on that player?
one thing I want to mention, Markel Bell. If the Cardinals wait on offensive tackle, if they decide, you know what, we brought in Pryor and Wilkinson, and we can let those guys can start this year, and we'll draft a guy who will develop, who will be ready to go in 27 when we're playing for real. In that kind of, if they take that approach, if they go edge or defensive player in the first round and they push out on tackle, and if there's a run on tackles and all the second tier guys are kind of gone, and they decide to wait. Bell is the kind of the guy I like because there's this philosophy that is there's certain measures, arm lengths and movement skills that tackle that if you get guys that have those skills, as long as they have the work ethic, you can coach them into being good tackles. And there's history. There's history of some of those guys not working out, but there are history of guys that have those skill sets who are taken late and end up becoming good tackles when they're developed. And Markel Bell is 6'9" and has 36 3/8 inch arms.
Yeah. That's Joe Alt like level numbers right there. It's crazy.
So like if you're going to take the approach of we draft or we sign some guys, journeymen who can be serviceable starters for now, we're gonna go for an edge rusher or something in first round, and we're actually going to wait and get our right tackle of the future a little bit later and develop a guy. Markel Bell is the guy I like there, and he graded well in college in the SEC, right? Really good pass grade, better actually pass blocking, run blocking grade. So like that's a guy. If I'm waiting on tackle, that's the guy I'm targeting. I'm not saying I am doing that, but if I am, and when I say waiting, I mean round 3 or later. Right,
Yeah.
not round 2. That's the guy I'm targeting in round 3 because of the tools. Next up, we have Justice Robert Moore, who has been in the chat. He's got Mauigoa, Jacob Rodriguez, a fan.
Love Jacob. That's my fave right there. Favorite pick right there.
Oh, yeah, man.
Never mind. I didn't see Caleb Proctor. I'll take the Caleb Proctor as my favorite pick.
And then we got Gabe Jackus. I probably mispronounced that. Skylar Bell, Taylor Green, Caleb Proctor, Pat Guggen. Landon Robinson and Mikhail Kamara. Well, Blake.
Yeah,
Why
I
don't
love the
you-
Jacob Rodriguez pick because I think that he's one of those linebackers with speed, with good coverage instincts, who's able to play everything against the run and the pass. You're not going to get long-term, like long contracts out of guys because they just run into people. So you're talking about 10 years is like crazy long for linebackers. He's one of those guys that if I can get him at the top of round 2, it gives you something you've not had if the Cardinals have with the Jonathan Gannon era, which is someone who can run from the Mike position and be able to have more athleticism than a Mac Wilson. That would, I think, move Mac Wilson to the will linebacker spot. You would have to wear the green dot from camp, but you have those expectations if you're taking this guy with the top pick that's going to be there. And then Caleb Proctor, he's just a penetrator. Like you put him on third down next to what you have already with Dante Still's replacement is kind of the best way that I've kind of tried to phrase him. Upfield, 3-gap penetrator. You can put him next to in a 4-3 sort of scenario with Walter Nolan, and you're going to get some instant pass rush up the middle in front of your quarterback. That's why I really like Caleb Proctor as the pick.
Kyler, thoughts?
Yeah, my guy from this one is Skylar Bell. Looking for that upgrade at slot receiver. Skylar Bell is one of my guys. If I can ever get him in a draft, just sort of rare that he falls around those spots. But I love him there. I think it's great value for him, actually. He's just like what I would perfectly want in a slot receiver, basically. Like a 4.4 40. I think he had like 1,200 yards last year. Granted, it's UConn, but still, that's a great college season. Lots of screen yards as well, and graded out really well. And he had double-digit touchdowns too. So like he's had a lot of college production. He is that fast, twitchy guy to push into the slot. I think he would be an excellent addition and complement to the pass catchers we already have. So out of this one, Skylar Bell is definitely my guy.
I like some of the same guys you like. Rodriguez, I think Bell is a great guy. If he's your third receiver, I love it. He's not a guy. He's a guy. If you draft him to be your number 1, he might be over his head. But like as a third receiver, great. Proctor, had a great combine. Small school guy with all the tools. So love that. My one concern is based on our needs and the strengths of this roster. I just don't like taking a tight end in the 4th round. I just think that's a bit early for us to take a tight end in the 4th round.
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did y'all catch that?
Taylor Green,
Yeah,
tight end.
I did.
All right.
I get it. Buddy's not going to
I
play
got it.
for
I just don't want it. Yeah.
He's a freaky athlete, man. Taylor Green, if you just want awesome measurements, freak. But
is he a quarterback at the next level?
no, he's not.
So, but Drew got it. Thanks, Drew. Yeah. That was my bad effort as a joke. But yeah, I really like this mock draft. I think Robert did a really great job. Right, Coogan's, and I think we talked about it in previous mock draft. Really, I think the reason he goes so far is he's really seen as a center primarily, not really a guy who's a guard. So for us, we don't need a center, but we could get a backup and develop him, right? Next up, we have Brian, who has been in the chat. Brian Abdallah, who has also been on Mock Draft Monday. He's got Manoa Pregnon, ignoring the chart. Lee Hunter, R. Mason Thomas, another edge rusher out of Oklahoma. Jacoby Lane, wide receiver, USC. Deontay Lawson, linebacker. Drew Aller. Adam Randall, running back, Clemson. Eric Rivers, wide receiver, Georgia Tech. Got a couple trades. Got a 2nd-round pick next year and a 6th-round pick next year. So there you go. We have someone said, let's see, we do have Gaines, who, right, I think, Blake, you kind of mentioned that, who is
right.
has played some center as a backup for us, right?
Right, and that's the one I think, at least when you're talking about playing center as a backup, you could also play guard. That's like your swing interior offensive lineman.
And I think you're responding to Robert, yeah.
Yep.
And I'll tell you, maybe this is my bias. Like, of the 3 guys that they have that they're trying to develop to be a starting guard, right? There's, Hayden Connor, John Gaines, and Isaiah Adams. Gaines is kind of the horse I'm betting on in that race.
Yeah.
I just think he has that physical tool. That was it, the shuttle that he just was that sub that time that is, or is it the three cone, which I forget which one it is, that for interior offensive line that's highly predictive, and he was within that threshold, and he looked good when he did play last year. So maybe for me, I'm not pigeonholing him as our backup center, because I kind of have this feeling in the end he might be one of our starting guards. We'll see.
It's very possible, at least I think too. Especially when you're talking about injuries taking place. Like one of the things with Isaac Siamalo is he missed about 5 or 6 games the last 2 years. So you're probably going to see him miss some games at least in the next 2 years that he's playing with the Cardinals.
Yeah, for sure. So Blake, give us a thought on this mock draft here.
Yeah, again, love our Mason Thomas as an edge rusher. Like, he's one of those guys that when we watch the tape, at least, he's a little bit undersized, but he just gets after it. Like, if you wanted to basically tell me and said, hey, we can't get Reuben Bain Jr., however, we can get you a discount version of Reuben Bain Jr., the closest guy for that would be our Mason Thomas. And he's very much with ball. I've been one of the guys who've kind of drafted a bit of Drew Allar as well. I think at least just taking a flyer on the measurables is great. But for me, like we've talked a little bit about that, our Mason Thomas, for me, you're probably going to be getting a first-round edge rush talent, and he gets it here at pick 65.
Yeah. Kyler.
I mean, I can go again if you want, but, you know.
What do you think?
Yeah. Knowing Brian well, he is the world's biggest Drew Allar defender at the moment for some reason. Look, Drew Allar has the perfect build that you want out of a quarterback, and if you want to go like extreme opposite build-wise from Kyler Murray, then Drew Allar is that guy. Big pocket quarterback. And for that, I like him. There are things and elements about Drew Allar I like. He's played a lot of ball, which is nice. He has a lot of college experience, and he has a nice build. So, and at 143, he's just like any of the other quarterbacks I've talked about. Take the one that you think has a potential to fit your system the best, and maybe you strike gold and hit it rich this year. And if you don't, you still go get your guy in round 1 next year.
Yeah. I don't hate that approach. Like, I'm not taking a quarterback at this point. Certainly not early, but I don't hate taking someone on day 3. If your idea is he's probably going to be our long-term backup once he develops, and there's a chance he's more, but we're still banking on, next year, right? I don't hate that. Real quick, I'll mention Eric Rivers, wide receiver at Georgia Tech. Small guy, 5'10", 176, slight frame, but fast, right? 4.35. So I just mentioned that. We've talked about, how a speed receiver would be a nice addition, just a guy at the bottom of the roster to run some go routes here and there, right? So I don't hate that. I think that's a nice pick for when you're talking about, pick 217, right? If you get 4.35 speed, 217, I'll take it. Next up, we have a friendly Viking who's been dropped mock drafts with us before in the past. He's got Francis Mauigoa, Christian Miller, defensive lineman in Georgia, A.J. Halsey, safety from LSU, Garrett Nismeyer, Tareen York, linebacker, Trey Zone, tackle, A&M, Jeff Caldwell, receiver, Cincinnati. Blake, what do you think?
Like Christian Miller, at least, is a very versatile defensive lineman. And then, of course, he goes with a safety. Getting a true safety, at least, there to play that center field spot is pretty good. I have to see a little bit as far as with A.J. Halsey, if he's going to be more of a box safety or a free safety, though, because that's one of the things that I always look for is I think the Cardinals are in the free safety market because I think you'll put Rabbit into a spot where he's going to be kind of in Buda Baker. He plays well in the box. You may need to get another safety who's able to... and it looks like he's going to be 6 foot 215 pounds, so he's going to be about adequately sized safety guy. I think that's one of the guys where it looks like he's more of a box safety for the most part, at least, but he has a couple of interceptions on his record. So honestly, that would be one of those places. But that's my favorite pick, probably, at least, is getting that safety player to be able to replace Jalen Thompson. I really like the aspect. I'll just have to be able to look a little bit more into Halsey. The biggest thing that I like about it is you need guys who can break up passes because, as we've seen with Rabbit, he's much more similar to the Buda Baker build of being in the box, and you want a guy who can play back a little bit more. And Halsey can do that.
Kyler.
I'll be so for real. I am not super familiar with some of the later round ones here, but Kristen Miller at 34, I like a lot. I've taken him at that spot before too. Great run defender, like in the 90s, and his pass rush win rate. He didn't rack up a ton of sacks from what I remember, but his win rate's really good. Like he pressures the quarterback effectively, and I think that's what the defense is going to be as far as the interior stuff goes. Not high sack numbers, just high pressure interior is the goal. Like Walter Nolan, and you get someone like Kristen Miller. So I think he would fit that idea really well. And at 34, I've seen him go in the first round too. So at 34, you're just getting whichever player of many different possibilities sneaks through, escapes the first round. So you're going to get a good player there. I think Kristen Miller is a really good pick.
Yeah, I want to mention a couple guys. First, what I'll mention is Trey Zune. He's short arms. He's listed as a tackle. He's a guy who's going to move inside, right? So, so if you're late, you're really taking him as a late round guard, developmental guard. So I don't hate that, guard center. But Jeff Caldwell, and Brian, just mentioned his his 100,000 1 million RAS. Like this guy, like his 40 time is 4.31 at 6'5".
That's crazy.
6'5", 218 pounds was RAS shows, and a 4.31 4-yard dash. Not super productive, in college, but this is a guy who, has the physical tools for sure. So, that's a guy you're actually I think someone will take him earlier than that with that profile. But if you're taking him on day 3, I'll take a shot on that. Big and fast like that. So I think he's an interesting one. And we got through them all.
Whoa.
It only took us an hour and 53 minutes, but we managed to pull it off. So gents, I don't want to belabor this because it is late and I live on the East Coast. But Blake, why don't you tell everyone where to find you and what you've got coming up with the Redbird Reboot podcast, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, we talked a lot about the quarterback needs for the Cardinals. We're going to talk a little bit about just some of the pass rushers coming up this week, just kind of a focus on that, and then talking a little bit about what we're expecting from if there's any changes or differences to the defense this week. So we're going to have a defensive-focused podcast. You can follow that at Redbird Reboot on X. You can also make sure you're listening in. I'm uploading the audio podcast again, so you can search for Redbird Reboot. You'll be able to hear this Mock Draft Monday and some of the other TCR podcasts there. As always, you can find the for those of you watching on YouTube, at Blake Murphy 7s, where you can find me as well. I'm happy to talk a little bit about the Cardinals with anyone and everyone, so always just reach back out. I always tell people, like, my DMs are open for a reason, just don't make it weird. Other than that, I'm good to go.
I'm not gonna. There's a certain Cardinals insider who habitually makes it weird, so don't be him.
Yeah, don't do that. Don't do that.
I'm not sure he's much of an insider anymore, to be honest.
Yeah, that's true. Sad thing is, we are not saying his name, and most of the people watching will know who. So, Tyler, where can people find you, and what you got coming down the pipeline?
Oh, nothing coming down, but you guys can continue to find me on Twitter, and you can find my written stuff with Sports Illustrated. Nothing particular coming up, but I do want to say, like, as a Cardinals fan, off season and draft stuff is basically our Super Bowl. So this is as sad as it is because we don't win games. This is one of my favorite times of year in the football cycle of things, and draft night is sort of like my Super Bowl night, since we haven't been since I was like 12. So I enjoy doing this, and always happy to look through mocks and talk with my friends about the potential, the hope for the future. This is hope season right now.
As a long time Cardinals fan, that's probably why I love the draft so much. It's the best thing to look forward to as a Cardinals fan every year, sadly. So, well, I'm going to be back next week with Drew and Jace. If you know Jace, AZ Jace, he's going to make his debut here on TCR Mock Draft Monday. And then Drew, who's been in the chat, is going to be with us. He's been on here before. And then following that, our buddy Kyler is going to be hosting. And Blake's going to be back with us on April 13th.
Yeah, just before the draft.
Yeah,
it'll be fun.
And and then we got me, Kyler, and Marcos coming back up, and we're gonna have a post-draft reaction live stream the week after, the Monday following the draft, where we will all kind of jump on here and talk about it. So, thank you all for hanging out with us. Be sure you hit the like button. Join us for next Mock Draft Monday. But for now, everyone, be well. Peace.